Welcome to the debate. Imagine you wake up every single morning and the very first thing you do before you even get out of bed is check the weather.
Like on your phone.
Right, exactly, on your phone. But you're not checking the weather outside your window. You are checking the weather in a city 3,000 miles away.
Okay, that sounds pretty exhausting.
It is. You memorize the barometric pressure, you obsessively track the storm fronts, and you spend hours arguing with strangers on the internet about the forecast.
All while your own living room ceiling is like actively dripping water onto the floor.
Exactly. You become a meteorological expert on a place you don't even live while your own house slowly floods. So today, we are examining the outsized role of national politics in modern life.
Yeah.
Specifically, we're looking at the premise that political engagement has become this overrated, all-consuming attention trap, one that actually degrades our individual well-being, our cognition, and, frankly, our real-world effectiveness.
Right. And to do that, we are drawing on a suite of recent analyses concerning the political attention trap. We're looking deeply into the disproportionate mental real estate that macropolitics occupies in our culture today.
The central question we are exploring is this: does modern political engagement fundamentally erode our agency and our well-being, replacing real action with a toxic spectacle?
Or, and this is the counter perspective, is the choice to disengage and focus inwardly a form of privilege, one that essentially abdicates necessary systemic responsibility.
Right. So I will be arguing that national political obsession is a harmful distraction. It pulls us away from what the source material calls the deep life, which is, a life of local, controllable action where we actually have leverage, and instead it traps us in a cycle of manufactured outrage.
And I will argue that framing national politics as some overrated distraction is fundamentally a position of privilege. Minimizing macropolitics just ignores its critical, life-altering impact on marginalized groups. Furthermore, massive systemic issues cannot be solved merely by retreating to the comforts of our local backyards.
Let me start by laying out my perspective here. What we are witnessing is a profound shift in the very nature of what politics actually is.
How do you mean?
Well, it has moved from being a civic duty, like a periodic, practical act of participating in collective decision-making, to an all-consuming mental bandwidth tax.
A bandwidth tax, okay.
Yeah, and the core of my argument rests on the agency paradox. As individuals, we are culturally conditioned to invest massive amounts of emotional labor into national or international macro issues, but our individual influence on these issues is effectively zero.
I mean, we feel like we're doing something, though.
We do. We really do, but we aren't. Our energy is entirely blocked by institutional inertia, massive lobbying apparatuses, and just sheer bureaucratic momentum.
Okay, but...
And while we are utterly consumed by this illusion of influence, we are simultaneously neglecting the microdomains, our personal health, our mastery projects, our local communities.
Right.
These are the areas where our leverage is actually incredibly high. Now, I want to be precise here. I am not saying governance doesn't matter. Governance is necessary plumbing.
Plumbing.
Yes, plumbing. It distributes resources, it maintains order. But society has falsely elevated this plumbing to the water of life. We have allowed a prepackaged tribal identity to replace genuine personal character, and that substitution has caused a complete epistemology collapse.
Wait, before we move on, let's unpack epistemology collapse for a second.
Sure.
You're saying that we aren't just disagreeing on policy, but that hyperpartisanship is actually destroying our shared mechanism for deciding what is true and what is false?
Precisely. We stop evaluating evidence altogether. We defend the team, and we lose our grip on shared reality in the process.
I understand the appeal of that framing. It sounds incredibly clarifying to just sweep the noise away, right?
Yeah.
But my perspective is that calling politics overrated or reducing it to mere plumbing is fundamentally a position of privilege. We can only call it an attention trap if our basic rights aren't the ones caught in it.
Oof.
Yes, the media ecosystem surrounding politics is deeply flawed. We completely agree on that. But macro-level politics directly determines the material conditions, the rights, and the physical safety of millions of people.
Oh, absolutely.
We are talking about healthcare access, migration rules, economic safety nets, education funding.
Which are heavy, important issues.
They are life or death issues, and the idea that we can just retreat to a simple, peaceful life locally is simply not a universal option. It is a luxury. When you look at historical social change, it almost always requires exactly the type of macro-level coalitional engagement that is currently being dismissed as just tribal performance. You cannot fix systemic national inequality by just tending to your local community garden. It requires sustained, collective pressure on the levers of national power.
Let's look at how that pressure is actually being applied today, though. Because I think the agency paradox is the hinge of this entire issue. The reality of modern political participation is doom-scrolling.
Is it, though?
Yes! It is reading 30 tweets about a legislative stalemate.
But that's a caricature of participation. That's just the media's version of it.
But that is the version 90% of people are engaging with. It's feeling a spike of cortisol and maybe sharing an article with a sarcastic comment. That individual energy has zero effect on the bureaucratic momentum of the state.
I wouldn't say zero.
It is exactly like the analogy we opened with, tracking the weather in a city you don't live in. The individual is pouring their most valuable hours into the macro-level noise of the capital, and all the while their own roof is leaking.
Right.
Their family relationships fracture, their personal skills stagnate, and their local community decays.
Look, I come at it from a different way, primarily because I think that analogy, while evocative, mischaracterizes the nature of macro politics.
How so?
It is not a distant city's weather. It is a hurricane headed directly for your coast. And yes, fixing your roof is a great idea. Attending the local school board meeting is essential.
Glad we agree there.
But local action cannot stop a Category 5 hurricane. It cannot stop massive wealth inequality. It cannot fix a national healthcare failure where millions are uninsured. When you say the individual energy has zero effect, you are looking at it in a vacuum.
Well,
A single drop of water doesn't turn a turbine, but a river does.
but are we actually forming a river? Or are we just a collection of evaporated drops, constantly being heated up by the media to no practical effect?
I mean, movements happen.
Let's talk about the mechanics of how policy is made, though. The systems that actually shape legislation, the lobbying groups, the economic pressures, the dense webs of backroom coalition management. They are structurally insulated from the kind of digital outrage that passes for engagement today.
They are insulated, yes, but not immune.
Even the politicians we obsess over are incredibly constrained by these systems. We invest our hope in a figurehead, expecting clean solutions to deeply intractable systemic problems. And then we are perpetually disappointed when they fail to deliver.
We are disappointed because the system selects for charismatic performers over careful practitioners. Certainly, the gap between the rhetoric of a campaign and the reality of governing is vast.
Exactly my point.
But that systemic lag doesn't mean the engagement is useless. It means the engagement needs to be persistent and coalitional. The problem with the agency paradox argument is that it treats collective action as if it's just a math problem, where one vote or one protest equals zero statistical significance.
Because statistically it often does.
But political energy shifts culture over time. Culture shifts the boundaries of acceptable discourse, which eventually shifts jurisprudence and legislation. Look at the labor movements or the civil rights era. Those required massive totalizing national attention.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because it assumes that the digital energy people are expending today functions the same way as grassroots organizing did in the 1960s.
Why wouldn't it?
Because the ecosystem is entirely different. The source material points to something much darker about our current ecosystem, the cognitive tax and the outrage machine. If we look at the evidence, strong partisan thinking actually degrades general reasoning.
In what way?
There's actual data in the material showing this. It's called identity protective cognition. When our brain perceives a threat to our social tribe, it spikes cortisol and essentially bypasses the prefrontal cortex. You know, the logic center?
Okay.
So when you show a hyper-partisan a math problem that proves their political party wrong, they literally lose the ability to do basic arithmetic.
Wait, really? A math problem?
Yes. Their brain is treating a math equation like a physical predator. It prioritizes tribal loyalty over factual accuracy as a survival mechanism.
Well, because human beings are fundamentally coalitional animals. We survive by staying with the group.
Right, but look at what that biological instinct is being harnessed by. The media ecosystems across the entire political spectrum are economically dependent on keeping that fight-or-flight response activated.
They certainly profit from it, yes.
They aren't just reporting on the hurricane. They are selling tickets to watch it hit and convincing you that if you just refresh your feed enough times, you can change the wind direction.
Okay, that's a fair critique of the media.
They turn governance into a reality TV spectacle of gotcha moments. They prioritize symbolism and optics over the unglamorous work of administration. They trap us in the current thing, a relentless cycle forcing us to have intense opinions on ephemeral headlines that just will vanish in a month.
Yeah.
So I have to ask, is expecting logical, detached evaluation of facts even possible in a system that literally monetizes our biological panic response?
Look, that's a compelling argument, but have you considered that what you are describing as a cognitive tax is sometimes the necessary cost of solidarity?
A necessary cost?
Yes. I absolutely acknowledge the toxicity of media punditry. The outrage machine is real and it is exhausting. It keeps the nervous system fried. But dismissing strong political affiliation as a mere identity trap ignores how power is actually contested in the real world.
How so? Because from where I sit, adopting a party line as a personality substitute looks exactly like the epistemology collapse we just defined. It looks like abandoning reason for the safety of the herd.
It looks like tribalism from the outside, sure, but from the inside, it is often necessary solidarity. Let's look at marginalized groups historically and today.
Okay.
When your rights are on the line, you don't have the luxury of detached, logical evaluation of abstract political philosophy. You form a coalition. You defend the team because the team is defending you.
But is the team actually defending you or just using your outrage?
The outrage isn't always manufactured by an algorithm. Sometimes it is a perfectly rational response to unjust material conditions. Yes, the media amplifies it for profit, but the underlying friction is real. It's not just a reality TV spectacle to the people who will lose their bodily autonomy or their health care if the wrong bill passes.
That's an interesting point, though. I would frame it differently. I don't deny that the underlying issues have real stakes. What I am challenging is the mechanism of our modern engagement.
The mechanism?
The current mode of engagement is a sophisticated substitute for action. It creates a powerful feeling of doing something, debating online, condemning the outgroup, moralizing everyday choices like what brands we buy, while producing absolutely no change in the world.
Right.
It's an illusion of participation, and worse, it poisons our actual physical relationships. We start treating our neighbors as ideological enemies over abstract national disagreements that have nothing to do with our shared local reality.
I agree that moralizing everyday life, like turning your choice of coffee shop into a frontline battle, is reductive and exhausting.
Very exhausting.
But I want to push back on the idea that national political debate is entirely disconnected from shared local reality. National policies dictate local realities. Federal funding dictates local infrastructure. You can't neatly sever the two.
You can't sever them, but...
If the hurricane is coming, pretending you live inland doesn't save you.
Right. Well, if national politics is a hurricane we can't stop, as you say, then my question is, why are we standing on the beach screaming at the clouds instead of boarding up our actual physical windows? That replacing this national political obsession with local action is the truest path to human flourishing.
Okay, but...
I see why you think that retreating is an abdication of responsibility, but let me give you a different perspective on what local action actually looks like.
Go ahead.
I'm talking about building mutual aid networks, improving personal skills, and cultivating relationships across differences so your community is resilient regardless of who is in the capital. Think about it. The loudest voices in the national discourse, the ones constantly screaming on television or social media, are frequently the least effective political actors in their actual communities.
While the people quietly building institutions and working on solvable problems rarely talk about national politics at all. Yeah, I know the argument.
Yes. And I posit that this political disengagement at the macro level isn't apathy. It is a highly strategic reallocation of resources to where they actually work.
Strategic.
It's recognizing that investing in your local city council, your school board, or your neighborhood association yields concrete, visible results. We massively overrate the power of the state to fix our lives, and we underrate our own responsibility to build a simple, peaceful, and competent life locally.
But
If everyone focused their bandwidth on their immediate sphere of influence, the aggregate effect would be a much stronger society.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that as a universal prescription. Let me tell you why.
Sure.
Reallocating your resources to optimize for tranquility or to focus on personal mastery projects like woodworking or coding or community gardening is a profound luxury.
A luxury?
Yes. For those whose rights, safety, and economic survival are constantly up for debate in the national arena, stepping back from the so-called spectacle means surrendering the field to those who already hold power.
But if their individual engagement isn't actually moving the needle, if it's just generating advertising revenue for tech platforms, isn't it just causing them psychological harm without providing any material benefit?
It is causing psychological harm, absolutely. The emotional cost, the anxiety, the cynicism, the helplessness is incredibly steep. But historical evidence shows that disengagement inherently benefits the status quo.
I mean, maybe historically, but
The people who have the luxury of calling macro politics overrated are generally the people whose lives are least affected by its outcomes. If the vulnerable decide to focus only on boarding up their own windows, the macro systems of power will bulldoze the entire neighborhood.
wow.
We have to maintain systemic vigilance. The advice to disengage, while mentally healthy on an individual level, is politically fatal on a collective level.
I see the tension there. You are saying the cost of engagement is high, but the cost of disengagement is systemic collapse for the vulnerable.
Exactly.
But I look at the toll it takes, the chronic alertness, the depression, the complete loss of inner peace, and I have to ask if a society composed of hyper-anxious, partisan-addicted citizens can actually govern itself effectively anyway.
That is the big question.
If our cognition is degraded by the very act of participating in the outrage machine, if our prefrontal cortexes are constantly bypassed by cortisol, we're not protecting the vulnerable. We're just joining a mob. Does hyperanxiety protect the garden, or does it just ruin the gardener?
That is the tightrope, isn't it? How do we engage in necessary coalitional politics without letting it become a totalizing identity? Because I agree with the source material on this one point. When political affiliation becomes your entire moral framework, you lose your humanity.
Absolutely. Politics is a tool for managing resources and rights. It cannot provide love, it cannot provide wisdom, and it certainly cannot provide inner peace.
Exactly. It cannot replace religion or ethics or community. When we try to make it do those things, when we ask the state to provide our ultimate sense of meaning, it fails catastrophically.
But acknowledging its limitations doesn't mean we should abandon the arena. It means we need to practice what the text calls moderate, strategic involvement.
Right. We need to advocate in areas of our actual expertise rather than having an uninformed opinion on every breaking news story. We need to focus on principles over teams. But we cannot pretend that the macro level doesn't exist or that it doesn't matter just because it's unpleasant to look at.
Which brings us to our final thoughts. My distinct takeaway remains that treating national politics as a primary source of meaning, identity, or entertainment is a psychological trap.
Yeah.
It squanders immense human potential, degrades our reasoning through identity-protective cognition, and fractures the bonds we share with our neighbors. By treating the state as the ultimate arbiter of our well-being, we neglect the controllable, local domains where real flourishing happens.
And my takeaway is that while the emotional toll of the modern outrage machine is undeniably toxic, abandoning the national political arena is not the answer. To abandon the macro is to abandon those who rely on its outcomes. The systemic realities of power, wealth, and rights require collective national vigilance, even if that vigilance is uncomfortable and slow to yield results.
We do find significant points of convergence today, though. We both agree that the media's relentless focus on performative outrage, gotcha moments, and symbolism over substance is a toxic distraction from real governments.
We do. The media ecosystem prioritizes emotional activation over understanding, and that serves no one but the platforms themselves.
Exactly.
We also entirely agree that local civic action, city councils, mutual aid, neighborhood networks, is severely underrated. The leverage we have in our own backyards is vastly greater than the leverage we have in the Capitol.
Where we remain divided is on the nature of the macro. We still disagree on whether national political engagement can be salvaged as a healthy, rational pursuit for the average individual, or if the system is inherently designed to be a high-stress, low-yield trap that we are better off minimizing.
It is a deeply complex balance, finding the line between a deep life of personal fulfillment and the civic responsibility we owe to the broader society is perhaps one of the defining challenges of modern adulthood.
I encourage everyone listening to evaluate their own mental real estate. Look closely at where you spend your attention, observe how your brain reacts to political media, and ask yourself what return you're actually getting on that cognitive investment.
There is a wealth of insight in the source material to explore further on this dynamic.
There really is, but as you do, consider the metaphor we started with, because tomorrow morning you are going to wake up, you are going to reach for your device, and you have a choice to make. Are you going to keep obsessing over the weather in a city you've never been to, or are you finally going to look up and fix the leak in your own roof?